Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I'm finally ready to do my full review on this guy. This is the Spartan Pallas, or Pallas. I think Kyle from DTOM Knives And Gear, who I borrowed this from, calls it the Pallas, but I want to say it's called Pallas. It's spelled P-A-L-L-A-S. Anyway, it is a button lock from Spartan Knives, and I really like Spartan. Spartan Blades, I should say. I think it's their technical name. I've borrowed the Spartan Harsey folder from my buddy Cutting Edge Gear, and I've also bought a Spartan Harsey folder. I guess I traded for it. I never ended up doing my full review of that knife because I traded it again before I could. It was the Damascus blade, but it had like the dragon scales on it. I feel like the sun's getting me in a weird way right now. Anyway, I really like the Spartan Harsey folder as a model, and Curtis over at Spartan Knives, who I've talked to a couple of times now, is a really cool dude. I like what they're up to. So this is a aluminum framed button lock, and it's pretty cool in a lot of ways. So this knife reminds me in several ways of ProTech knives, because my current other aluminum button lock knives that I've experienced have all been from ProTech. They make knives like the Mordax and the Malibu and the Cambria, I think it's called. Is that what it's called? I think it is. I've done a video comparing the three, and anyway, I really like ProTech's aluminum manual button locks. This is a little different though, and I think everybody who's reviewed it has probably said similar things if they've held both, but this one has what most people would think is a flipper tab. Luckily, I know directly from Curtis that this is not meant to be a flipper tab, because if it was, I would think it's unacceptable. It's just a really loosey-goosey flipper tab. It doesn't really work for the way the detent is set up in here, but it goes where a flipper tab goes, and it looks like a flipper tab, so you expect it to be a flipper tab. What it's actually designed to be is a kind of a forward guard, a finger guard, if you will. So when you understand that, and you realize that this knife is meant to be just deployed with the thumb studs, it makes a lot more sense. Because with the thumb studs, this action is awesome. The flipper tab, not so awesome. But it's not a flipper tab, so keep that in mind. My buddy Sean, Geared Toward Gear, who I've had on my podcast just recently, he has one of these, and he actually ground off the flipper tab, and I think that's pretty cool, because I don't necessarily feel like for my uses with this knife I would need a forward kind of guard. Not that it's bad or in the way, but that just alleviates any tendency to try to use the flipper tab, because it's just so underwhelming when you try to use it that way. It's just too loose of a detent. But yeah, with the thumb studs, man, it is fun to deploy, and then with the button, it's just a lot of fun to fidget with, because it drops shut and it locks right in. I mean, it's just, if I let go of the button once the blade is falling, see if I can get that timing right, it sucks itself right in, stays put. If I stay on the button, it does bounce around a little bit, but this blade is nice and heavy, and it's kind of proportioned where it still falls into place. It's nice. So obviously we are running aluminum scales, we have a push button lock, and then we have S35 VN blade steel on here. The spine on this knife is crowned really well. The edges are all chamfered really well. This is a well-designed knife. I like that compared to like the Spartan Harsey folder, this has fairly muted jimping. It feels much smoother and softer in my hands. I like the ergos on this, frankly, a little bit better for that. I don't know if you removed some of the jimping from a Spartan Harsey folder, if I'd still feel the same way, but in comparison, this feels really, really good. I also like that on the blade up here, I can put my thumb forward into this spot. That feels really comfortable as well. So there's just a lot of good kind of grip angles I find myself being able to use. It's great in reverse grip. It's really good. So yeah, I guess I just started talking ergos without announcing my entry into it. But ergos on this knife are very, very good. I enjoy the ergos. I think for especially such a big knife, it fits my hand well. This is a large knife. It's definitely kind of on the top end of what I would EDC, and it fits my hand really well. Plus it's fairly light because of all that aluminum in the construction, so it just works well. Yeah, so ergos are going to be a pass for me. I like it a lot. I think reverse grip might actually be my favorite grip on it. Reverse draw cut is fine. Something's knocking rocks down the hillside next to me. Reverse draw cut, it's pretty good. Forward grip draw cut, very good. Forward grip, hammered grip, really good. And then saber grip is excellent. I especially like that I've got multiple spots to put my thumb. That feels good to me. So, ergos are a win. Action we already talked about as well. Action is just fantastic when you use the thumb studs. You can also middle finger flick it with the thumb studs, which for me is a big win. I like to middle finger flick knives. So as thumb stud knives go, this one's a lot of fun to play with. The button lock just makes it a blast. It definitely rides on bearings. Yeah, I'm looking in there. I can tell by using it, but I always think I should probably look and check. Anyways, it's just super drop shutty, super fun to deploy. It's a great action. Again, flipper tab, not so much, but thumb studs, yes. In terms of carry on this guy, it's fine. If you know me and my preferences, you'll know that I vastly prefer deep carry pocket clips to non-deep carry pocket clips, and this one is not deep at all. It's a lot of knife that ends up sticking out of your pocket. I don't think it's a hideous looking pocket clip. It's cool that they put their arrow in there, but it just leaves a lot of knife sticking out of your pocket. Some people prefer that because then you can grab it with this kind of section up here. To me, I'd just rather have it deep carry. I've figured out how to grab a knife out of my pocket without having some of it sticking out, and yeah, that would be my preference. But it's fine. The clip retention is good. It's very smooth in and out of pocket because these aluminum scales are just perfectly smooth. It's just, I wish it was deeper personally, but it's fine. So yeah, the last category would be cutting performance, and I think this knife cuts pretty well. It's definitely thick behind the edge, but it's not like insanely thick behind the edge. I feel like for the size of this knife overall, and kind of how like hardcore it feels and how robust it is, it makes sense that they went with a little bit of a thicker behind the edge profile. It's a flat grind, and it comes up, I don't know what you would call that, like maybe 60–70%, somewhere in there, and it's not focused on being thin. That said, the edge that's on here is very sharp. The edge bevel, I don't know if this is the factory edge or not, it's not perfectly even. Like the edge is a little bit taller up in the belly than it is down in the flat. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but it's just a little bit of a different, gets a little taller in there. But it's a good edge. I mean, it's functionally fine. So I think cutting performance on this guy, it depends on what you want to do with it, right? Like if you're comparing this to other, what I would consider like EDC knives, go in your pocket every day, opening cardboard boxes and cutting zip ties, stuff like that, I think other knives will probably serve you a little bit better just because this is a little thick behind the edge. But if you want it to be a little extra robust, a little more trustworthy for things that are more in the nature of like prying, or not that I condone necessarily prying with folding knives, but if you're going to be doing a little bit harder use stuff, sometimes it does feel nice to have a thicker behind the edge profile. I don't think, to be honest, and from what I've read and seen, that that actually adds to better like edge strength, like that being thin behind the edge can actually make your edge last longer and it can have some advantages. But I don't know, it does feel to me when I hold a knife that's got a thick blade stock and stays kind of thick, like it's just a little more burly and capable. So not super thin, but it's not crazy thick either. I've felt thicker behind the edge knives, and down here in kind of the flat, it's where it's thinnest. Still very thick compared to many other knives, but yeah. So cutting, I'm gonna call like a, it's fine. So where does that leave us? Carry is probably, for me, the kind of weak point of this knife. It's light, the dimensions are good, it's smooth, so in those ways it's fine, but this pocket clip just leaves so much of the knife hanging out of your pocket that to me it's like, I'd just rather have the knife sit further in. If that doesn't bother you, then carry's probably going to be a dream on this. Like if you want knife to grab onto, and like I said, it's, for the size of this knife, feels very light to me, and it's very smooth, and so that's all good. But carry for me is just like meh. Cutting for me is meh. It's not fantastic, but it's not terrible. Where it shines is going to be the action. because this button lock is just a lot of fun. I don't know if there's a deer up there or what. Something is really pushing a lot of stuff down the hillside. Anyway, the action is probably my favorite thing about it. I really like button locks. I like knives on bearings. I like knives that are fun to fidget with, and this is that. This is just a lot of fun to sit and play with. And then ergos are really good as well. Not like the greatest ergos in the world, but there's no hot spots. I feel locked in. I love it when knives don't have aggressive texturing all over them to lock me in. I feel like I talk about this a lot, but knives that just ergonomically fit in my hand don't need to have a bunch of jimping all over the place and really aggressively textured scales. Like, these scales are pretty slick. They've got this kind of milled section in them, which helps a little. My fingers kind of dig into that a little bit, but overall this knife is very smooth, and it doesn't need more texture than it has. It's just the ergos lock me in fine all on their own. That's the best way to design a knife handle, in my opinion. I don't think I should need serrations on my handle to keep me locked into it, personally. But I use my knives differently than some others do, and some people love jimping. I'm just not one of them. So yeah, I think this knife is cool. I dig it. If you were to ask me which do I prefer, this or my Malibu from ProTech, for me the Malibu it was my 2020 knife of the year. I love the Malibu, and that knife is just borderline perfect for my preferences. I do think it would be fun if the Malibu had multiple deployment methods instead of just the flipper, but I'd take the flipper, I think, over these thumb studs personally, and that knife has a deep carry clip. Frankly, my favorite deep carry clip. The size is a little bit better for me. It's more pocketable. Carry that one as a primary or a secondary. It's like more versatile for me. So I think, yeah, if you ask me which I prefer, then the Malibu for sure. It's one of my favorite knives. But this is really, really good. And I think this probably competes a little more, at least in size, with like the Mordax. I had a Mordax. I'd like to get another. I think I'd probably still take the Mordax just barely over this, but it's close at this point because this one feels a little bit more authoritative than the Mordax, and the Mordax was pretty thick behind the edge as well. So I don't know. Take all of that for what it's worth. This is the Spartan Pallas. Kyle from DTOM Knives and Gear will be linked down below because he loaned it to me. Can't tell if I'm focusing. Yeah, I like this knife. I'm not in love with it. It's not my favorite, but it's cool and it's nice, and I think it's recommendable. So there you have it. Thanks guys. I'll see you on the next one.